If you're looking for openings advice, you've come to the right place. Throughout the course of this video, we're going to cover basic, intermediate, and advanced opening concepts, and so whatever your current rating level is, you're going to get something out of it. Let's just jump right in. At the very beginning of the game, it's considered good to put one pawn or two in the center, followed by the movement of your knights and bishops, and getting your king to safety. So, in a perfect world, that looks something like this. Both knights come out. Important to move the bishop to the center of the board before moving this pawn to get this bishop out, because if you do that, you block in your bishop. Put the bishop in the center. Let's say I don't. I'll play something a little bit more passive. Now you can castle your king or do this. It's not extremely important just yet. Let's say black castles. Now d3, and the bishop comes out. In the future, you can then make a quick queen move and connect your rooks. And what that will look like is something like this. Just get the bishop out here, and now the rooks are connected and come to the center of the board. That's a very, very quick onboarding process. One more thing I should say about this position is that you don't necessarily have to castle the king the short way. You can castle queenside, you can castle long. Also, we started with a king's pawn, but if you want to play a queen's pawn opening, that's completely fine. And then play knight, bishop, and the same stuff. Two pawns in the center if possible, but if not, then okay, you'll just have to go one square. When we flip the board as well, we can look at this from black's perspective. And let's say you have the black pieces, you do the very, very same thing. The only difference when you play black, whether they play king's pawn, queen's pawn, is that you are reacting to their moves. And there are little tricks with some venom in them when you play the black pieces. For example, the scholar's mate, the 4-move checkmate. The weak square near your king has to be guarded. And so when they play knight out, attacking your pawn, and you go like this, there's this move. And so it's sometimes actually better to bring the bishop out before the knight, because there's something called the fried liver attack, which I'm not going to study too deeply in this video, but if you're a beginning player, you should definitely go explore what the fried liver attack is. It's when white plays this very aggressive move and just tries to destroy your setup very early. So when you play black, there's a little bit more venom. I mean, there's even stuff, ridiculous stuff like queen h5, where they try to attack you and also try to set up the 4-move mate. But if you get all of the responses down, you're going to be just fine. Developing in the center, both knights, the bishop, castle, the second bishop, and so on. That's just a very, very quick run through with the white and the black side in a couple of minutes of how you should be playing the first 5-10 moves of the game. Okay, let's start adding another layer to this. Let's flip the board back to the white side. And now, this is probably going to be more useful for the people that are going into the intermediate phase of chess understanding, not just the beginners. Chess has two types of openings: setup-based openings and theory-based openings. A setup-based opening is an opening that you can basically play the same way all the time. An example is the Queen's Pawn London opening. And regardless of how black plays, you go like this. You play knight f3, bishop f4 on your next move. Then you play e3. Then you put this knight here. So for example, knight d2. Then the bishop here. And then you complete this little pawn pyramid. And then you castle. It's called a setup-based opening because you set it up every single game. Now, this is one way. Another opening with the white pieces that's setup-based. There's a lot of queen's pawn ones that are setup-based, like the Kali, for example. Another one is the English, which is when you play c4, and then on your next move, you play g3 and bishop g2, so something like this, and you fight for the center in the following way, with this knight. And then this knight likes to come here. You play e3, knight e2, and castle. And again, you can play the setup against basically anything. Those are good openings for folks that don't want to learn a whole lot of theory. Theory-based openings, for example, e4 is a theory-based opening. What is that? A theory-based opening is when you need to know specific responses that are considered the best against what your opponent is playing. When you play the king's pawn, you need to know how to deal with the king's pawn response, the Sicilian, the Caro-Kann, the French, And there's many, many others. Those are the 4 main ones, but against the king's pawn, black can play a whole variety of things. And so those, you might need a book. You might need an openings course, which I do have an openings course, but there's many, many out there. There's things on Chessable, chess.com, YouTube videos, books all over the place. But that's for folks that are transitioning from intermediate to advanced chess. They want to learn things. Let's look for the black pieces, what setup openings are available to us. With black, it's a little harder because obviously white can play anything. He can play, literally anything. So the most flexible setup-based opening is called the King's Indian setup, and it goes like this. D6, knight f6, g6 to put the bishop here, and then castles. Then you develop the queenside bishop and the queenside knight, and you try to put a pawn in the center of the board in the future. The interesting thing about the King's Indian is you can play it against literally anything. It does not matter how they start. If they start with the queen's pawn, it's the same exact thing. Knight f6, g6, bishop g7, and castles. This might be useful for some beginners in the chat as well. In the chat. It's like I'm live streaming. So this setup is just very easy to play. It's a kind of a one-size-fits-all solution. It doesn't matter. They can play a setup-based, thing too. The London, g6, bishop g7, and castles. I get a lot of questions from viewers like, should I study different things against all of the different openings? If you're strong enough to do so and you've got the memory capacity and the time and the experience, yes. But this will simplify your opening study quite significantly. With black, the theory-based approach is you learn something against d4. Maybe you learn the Caro-Kann or the Sicilian. But then when d4 comes around, now you need an opening here as well. Another way to play is the E6b6 setup. I recently made an opening study on this. But the King's Indian setup is perfectly good against just about anything that white can do. For the more advanced players that are watching, if you've made it this far, or you jumped ahead in the video, openings are a really, really good tool to start implementing into your game at around 1400-1500. That is when you are going to find the most success with your openings. The way you have to think about openings, again, let's flip back to the white pieces. Let's say you play e4, right? About 80% of your games are going to be Sicilian or King's Pawn with e5. And now you've got to start strategizing in an interesting way. When you go up against opponents that play the Sicilian, for example, maybe they have like a Chessable course on this, right? They probably spend hours and hours looking through the opening theory. But then you don't enter the main lines. Main lines meaning what's considered the most popular at the Grandmaster level. Maybe instead of playing the open Sicilian, you play the Rossolimo Sicilian. Or you play the closed Sicilian, Grand Prix attack, or g3, bishop g2. There's all sorts of different ideas out there for the more advanced players. So how about we do this? For the more advanced players, and anybody, intermediate or beginner, let me know your openings questions in the comments below. I'm going to try to answer as many viewer questions as possible in this video. Hopefully it was helpful with whatever rating level that you are. You can share this video to your friends who are also trying to potentially learn chess. This, in my opinion, is the best way to approach the opening phase of the game, whether you're 600, 800, 1,000, 1,200, or even a 2,000 rated player. All right, thanks so much for watching. Hit the like button if you haven't already, and check out some of my other videos on my channel.